1/15 of the Earth's surface, inhabited for over 12,000 years by more than 1 million indigenous people. A land bordered by 240,000 kilometers of shoreline, the longest in the world. Majestic forests yield over 1 trillion trees. 2 million rivers and hundreds of thousands of lakes. More than 20% of the world's fresh water. Water that nourishes nations. Among them, the Wendat and Haudenosaunee, inland residents of the continent's northeast.
Where we live and how we live with the land is how we defined ourselves and how we survived for years.
I think this comes from the relationship with the natural world. Indigenous people are very much about relationship building. And they had very advanced democracies set up.
Bison herds over 80 kilometers long roam the interior. Migrating with them are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Blackfoot Confederacy. 4,000-meter peaks harbor dozens of thriving coastal nations to the west. This vast and diverse land will soon get its name.
Canada, Ganada, is our word. The founding peoples of Canada are the Indigenous peoples.
At the dawn of the 17th century, worlds collide.
The arrival of Europeans was the inciting incident in the creation of Canada, in the story that we're living today.
July 3rd, 1608. Month 2 of a grueling voyage on a French ship christened Le Don de Dieu. It's battling the Atlantic to a continent that Europeans call the New World. Born into a family of mariners, explorer Samuel de Champlain knows these waters. He's already survived 2 trips. Now, he's back for more.
He was clearly a guy of immense determination, and not to mention ambition. He had a genius for surviving. I mean, just able to withstand, journeys across the sea, which at that time were horrible.
Champlain has petitioned the King of France and been entrusted with a mission: to create a permanent trade settlement and found a nation. New France. Since Columbus crossed the Atlantic a century earlier, merchants have made hundreds of trips to trade with indigenous nations for fur and fish. But Europeans hunger for more.
Europe at the time had been denuded of its forests, of its animals. It was exactly what Europe needed in terms of economic development and moving forward. And so Champlain knew that.
Other Europeans have come and gone. Champlain wants to stay, driven by dreams of prosperity and a new start.
Champlain saw the possibilities of a new world, not just the possibilities of timber and furs. But he was saying, we could make a whole new place here.
Champlain selects a lush and sheltered site. What is now Quebec City. The powerful Innu and Wendat nations are skilled fur traders who dominate the region. They welcome ships as they come and go.
the indigenous communities that were first made contact with were very open and, you know, rolled out the red carpet.
Champlain will need his neighbors if his settlement is to succeed.
Allez-y!
But first, he has to build a shelter for his 27 men. In 3 months, winter will come. Temperatures will plummet to almost 40 below, trapping the Frenchmen till spring.
These must have been immensely resourceful, determined, gritty human beings. And in terms of their physical ability and capability and survivability, nothing like the wussiness of our age.
Duval, Natrel, au travail.
Relentless, Champlain pushes his men hard. He knows if his settlement is successful, New France could dominate the lucrative fur trade with the Old World. A dream every rival European nation would like to crush. One of Champlain's 27 men is already in the pocket of a competing trader. And tonight, he's recruiting.
Moi, j'en ai assez. Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire? On va révolter. Champlain doit mourir. Demain. Êtes-vous avec moi?
Locksmith Jean Duval is the linchpin of an assassination plot.
C'est Duval. Ils veulent assassiner Champlain ce soir.
Conspirator Antoine Natel
Certain?
crumbles under pressure. If Champlain shows weakness, he will lose the confidence of his men. He acts decisively, charging Duval with treason.
People may think of Canadians as mild-mannered. I think it would surprise the world to know that Canadians could be very intolerant of others and that our history has got lots of blood and guts and nastiness.
But Champlain also shows mercy. He pardons the rest of the conspirators and secures their loyalty. Over the next 5 months, Champlain's men used 30-meter walnut trees and quarried rock from limestone cliffs to create 3 formidable structures. A wraparound palisade, watchtower, a moat 4.5 meters wide, and a line of cannons. It is the first permanent European settlement in Canada. Quebec will become the capital of New France, Canada's first fortified city.
There's a level of courage that could only come from this fierce belief that this is going to work. And maybe not right away, but it will work, and a stubbornness to make it so, and the capacity to convince others of it. Well, that's the kind of people we're made of.
But a handful of Frenchmen will not decide Canada's fate. That belongs to the people who have been here for over 12,000 years. December 1608. Winter has come to New France with a vengeance. Champlain and his men face the prospect of death, locked in by ice and snow. Freezing cold and severely malnourished. Scurvy sets in.
Nature, of course, is the dilemma of Canada. The weather overwhelmed us, I think, really. And it would overwhelm anyone who lived here.
Le 18 de novembre, il tomba une quantité de neige. Il mourut en ce mois un matelot et notre serrurier.
Of the 27 men who crossed the Atlantic with Champlain just 5 months ago, only 7 survived this winter. For his European colony to continue, Champlain must show France he can turn a profit, or be shut down. His greatest hope is a precious commodity found here in the millions. The beaver. 35 kilos of thick, fleecy gold. Capable of changing the course of rivers, they will also change the course of our nation's history.
I mean, it's just such an incredible saga to think how they found not spices and glory and gold, but in this kind of crazy little creature that waddled along the road, you know, with a funny tail and a cute face, and suddenly upon that little creature's back would be born the dream of Canada.
Beaver pelts have been traded by Indigenous nations on the continent for millennia.
We traded often amongst ourselves. Commerce was something we knew very well, and how to sustain our economies.
The arrival of Europeans begins as an opportunity, access to the global market.
The First Nations were partners, but perhaps the dominant partner in that relationship. It was First Nations which controlled the economics, all of those defining features of what was the early beginnings of Canada.
June 18th, 1609. Ashestagwin, chief of the Aran-Denranon Nation of the Wendat Confederacy. Today, he travels to an historic meeting on the shores of Quebec. Ashestagwin wants greater control of the trade routes along the mighty river we now call the St. Lawrence.
The St. Lawrence was the lifeline between the ocean and eastern Canada to the Great Lakes, which then spread out into all of the canoe routes right across the country to the Rocky Mountains.
Chief Ashestagwin and his people lived north of the Great Lakes, brokering the fur trade through the east-west routes. To the south, a dominant alliance. A sophisticated democracy that inspires the creators of the U.S. Constitution, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. They also want access to these global trade routes.
Our people reacted like you'd expect. We want to protect our land and our people and our children. And so often we did become involved with these conflicts.
Doka, Dagway Akuk, Dewa Saste.
To maintain his people's economic security, Chief Ashestagwin grants a meeting to a man who has his own designs on the fur trade. Samuel de Champlain.
When the French initially came to North America, they came in small numbers. They undertook trade on indigenous terms. Indigenous peoples dominated the relationship and controlled the terms of the relationship.
They will strike an historic deal, one that gives Champlain exclusive rights to the Wendat fur trade. In exchange, New France will side with Oshasteguin and his people in their fight against the Haudenosaunee. With a weapon none have seen before. The arquebus. They can't match the accuracy of an arrow, but it can throw a bullet up to 1,000 meters and pierce heavy cavalry armor. 4 weeks later, in what is now upstate New York, the Wendat, alongside the Algonquin and Innu, cross into Haudenosaunee territory. The two most powerful Indigenous alliances along the St. Lawrence are about to face off. The largest fur trade on Earth is at stake.
That was his trophy, his gun. All these things that were really foreign to us. It changed the whole life of the people of this land. Changed tremendously. Je couchais mon arquebuse en joue et visa droit un des trois chefs. Du quel coup, on tomba deux par terre. So yeah, it made a really negative impact on our people. Could we have controlled it at the time? No.
The victory forges a strong bond between the Wendat and New France. Together, they seize control of the St. Lawrence and a monopoly on the fur trade. For the next half-century, over 500,000 kilograms of beaver pelts will travel 1,000 kilometers down the St. Lawrence and journey more than 40 days across the Atlantic. Soft beaver fur is easily shaped into stylish hats, which become the rage across Europe. France's economy is booming, all because of a weapon which upsets the balance of power among Indigenous nations. With a new ally and a firm grip on the fur trade, the French prosper. But to grow as a colony, they will need a key ingredient: women. The New France-Wendat alliance dominates the fur trade along the St. Lawrence. By 1670, that monopoly is under attack. Another superpower wants in on the action: the mighty British Empire. The American Revolution is still a century away. Britain is aggressively expanding its colonies in the south. British settlers now outnumber the French 18-1.
The British colonies in what is now the United States were expanding almost constantly. They were very prosperous. They grew at a pace that was much greater than that of Quebec.
King Louis XIV retaliates with a most unusual tactic. He sends more than a dozen ships to New France, loaded not with cannons or soldiers, but with France's poorest women.
You're really talking about the most vulnerable people. You know, poor, orphaned, female, teen.
On this historic voyage is 24-year-old Elizabeth Aubert. She has left behind a rough life in a Paris orphanage.
I'm sure the voyage was extremely difficult. They were all crammed in there, probably, slung in hammocks, vomiting over each other. It must have been just the most horrific thing.
With no guarantee, no promise of anything, not even knowing if their life's gonna be better than where they came from. They're starting over in that ship.
Elizabeth and the others will become known as les filles du roi, the king's daughters. Three months after leaving France, they finally arrive. 1 in 10 will die in these crossings. For the survivors, this is home. It sinks in. They must now marry French settlers and grow families for New France. There's no time to waste. The process for finding a mate begins.
They're sailing off into the unknown, but when they arrive...
Bonjour, monsieur.
Bonjour.
They're presented, some of them probably, for the first time in their lives, with an actual choice.
Supervising all operations is New France's intendant, Jean Talon, and an Ursuline nun, Marie Guillard.
Avez-vous de la propriété?
It was, I guess, a date with mortal consequences. It's kind of like suss out the environment and kind of go, okay, I guess I'll go with him.
Est-ce que vous êtes religieux?
Oui, bien sûr.
Avez-vous des vices, monsieur?
Non.
I'd love to imagine for Elizabeth that she was a dreamer.
Suivant.
Stuck in a bad situation, but had a vision of something better for herself.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Avez-vous des vices, monsieur?
Je n'ai pas le temps pour des vices.
Elizabeth has met her match. Aubin Lambert, a hard-working farmer who settled here almost a decade ago. On September 29th, 1670, in Quebec City, they marry.
These women were thrown here into such hard situation, and they had to really, those who survived had to be really, really strong. I see the women in Quebec and I think, wow, there's something so special about women in Quebec. So maybe it comes from that. Maybe it comes from the beginning.
For her commitment, Elizabeth receives an automatic dowry of 50 French livres, almost $1,000 today. As a family, they can also claim a lifelong pension of 300 livres a year if they produce 10 children. And in 1689, Elizabeth reaches that target.
They are essentially tools of empire. And man, they are doing the grunt work.
France sends nearly 800 filles du roi to the colonies. The population of New France doubles, and land claims expand. Babies are born at a rate that Canada will never see again. On average, 5 children per family, almost twice that of the 20th century baby boom. Today, more than 2/3 of French Canadians can trace their ancestry to les filles du roi.
It's a long line of people who have been rejected and who had nowhere else to go, who came to Canada. That's part of our heritage. That's what we come from in Canada. That's what we are.
But New France's population boom puts a heavy strain on resources.
By 1650, the French had pretty well exterminated the beaver population in the lower St. Lawrence Valley. So the best beaver hunting grounds are in northern Ontario.
French fur trader Médard Chouard de Grossier and his brother-in-law, Pierre Esprit Radisson, search for an answer to the beaver shortage. Indigenous guides have sent them north to a remote Cree village. No European has ever been here before. By October 1659, after 2 months of punishing travel, the brothers reach the south shore of Lake Superior. Radisson and de Grossier meet Cree elders, carrying treasures that will change their destinies. Fluent in Cree, de Grossier requests a sample of the elders' furs. These unusually thick pelts are much more valuable than those left in New France.
Qu'est-ce qu'il a dit? Il dit qu'il a trouvé ça au nord. Yeah.
The elders offer directions to a network of rivers flowing into a massive saltwater bay, home to a large supply of the most magnificent beaver pelts in the world. Radisson and de Grossier have just been given the key to Canada's El Dorado. But instead of saving New France from ruin, they changed the balance of power in Canada forever. Cree elders offer struggling traders Radisson and de Grossier a northern jackpot of the world's most luxurious furs.
Devrions y aller.
The men hope this partnership will make them rich and save New France's ailing economy. But this major expedition will be expensive.
Going back to Columbus, exploration was always fulfilling a commercial mandate. I mean, you know, we can talk about the spirit of adventure, the curiosity that drives people on, but let's never forget that these were mercantile opportunities. Every single expedition had to have a patron.
The Frenchmen rushed back to Quebec with thick, fleecy souvenirs, hoping to excite Governor d'Argenson.
Regardez ce que nous vous rapportons du Nord. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Arrêtez cet homme!
Governor d'Argenson chooses not to help, but punish.
Attendez! Nous vous apportons un moyen de vous enrichir.
He fines both men for trading without a license.
He was annoyed with Radisson and Grossier for going out on their own and not immediately involving him.
He makes an example of the defiant de Grossier. A few days of jail time doesn't stop de Grossier.
Bon, Médard, qu'allons-nous faire?
It emboldens him.
Devenir riche. Devenir très riche.
Mais à qui est-ce que nous allons les vendre?
The one thing that all entrepreneurs have in common is an unshakable confidence. They see opportunity where others don't. Every story you look at in this country is an entrepreneurial story. And that is the true narrative of this country.
Driven by an unquenchable thirst for adventure and riches, these Frenchmen will take any risk to secure a patron. even if it means making the long journey across the Atlantic. Even if it means siding with your country's sworn enemy.
Gentlemen, we have a proposal for you. A proposal that could make you rich.
1665. De Grossier and Radisson talk their way into a meeting with the British elite at the Royal Court in Oxford.
This was a time of dynasties. This was a time of monarchies. And they were the Bill Gates, if you like, of the time. And they had the funds, and they wanted to expand their empires and their purview.
Gentlemen, with your support, we could make England the masters of the fur trade.
What the Frenchmen are proposing is an act of treason. But King Charles II himself agrees to fund the venture.
Canadians believe that they can overcome barriers, either over it, under it, around it, or through it. They can find a way. And there's no question that Radisson and de Grossier found a way.
1668. The fur traders sail back towards their destiny, with the fate of 2 European empires at stake. Cree elders have given them a map to a meeting place. But Radisson is forced to turn back when his ship is badly damaged. De Grossier continues on his perilous voyage. After 3 months, he reaches a saltwater bay the size of Western Europe. Hudson Bay. Named after explorer Henry Hudson, who died in these waters 6 decades earlier. It's teeming with wildlife and home to millions of beavers with the thickest fur on the planet. Word of de Grossier's arrival spreads amongst Cree trappers, hungry for new customers. By spring, they greet him bearing luxurious pelts worth over 200,000 of today's dollars. The Hudson's Bay Company is born. King Charles II unilaterally grants it control over the richest fur trade on Earth. The Hudson's Bay Company will become one of Canada's most enduring institutions. But British land claims to develop on Indigenous territory will create controversy for centuries.
The English were trying to take over a lot more of the territory. And it was over our land, our resources, our furs. This is the part of Canada's history we forget.
By 1759, Britain wants more than a trading monopoly. They also want New France. They go on a military rampage, crushing French settlements along the eastern seaboard. Their ultimate target is the fortress of Quebec City, the capital founded by Champlain 150 years earlier. And a brash young British officer, James Wolfe, is determined to get inside its walls. August 1759. For the last year, the British have decimated almost all French settlements along the Atlantic coast. And now, one of their most aggressive generals, James Wolfe, is set to storm the city of Quebec. An act that will put North America firmly in British hands and transform the destiny of the continent. "11,000 troops, 1/4 of the entire British Army in North America sails up the St. Lawrence. It is the finest armed force the world has ever seen. By reputation, near invincible. But the defenses that await them are more than formidable. 53-meter cliffs, the height of Niagara Falls, shield a triangular fortress on 2 sides. On the third, enemies face a wall 9 meters high and over 4 kilometers long. Its guardian, Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, is one of the most successful French generals in the 7 Years' War against Great Britain. He knows that if his gigantic fortress falls, French power on the continent ends. What Montcalm doesn't know is that General James Wolfe has a daring plan. September 13th, 1759, 4:30 a.m. The British begin a breakneck climb up the 50-meter cliff towards Quebec City.
It's very important to use surprise because, for example, in a fight, what you don't see coming, that's what knocks you out. People think it's about strength and power. This is not true. It's about timing and accuracy, how to be deceiving. Something you don't see coming, that's what gonna get you.
Before the French can react, 4,500 British soldiers are up the cliff and onto the plains of Abraham. Montcalm rushes thousands of troops into an unrehearsed charge. Wolfe does the unexpected. He orders his men to hold their fire. The rash French volley mostly misses its mark.
Division! We'll advance!
It's Wolfe's turn. While the French reload, he orders his men to arm themselves with 2 musket balls.
Set!
They'll have a shorter range, but twice the firepower. The tactic is brutally effective.
They knew what their strength was. Their strength was British volley fire, delivered by the soldiers who had trained in it for thousands and thousands of hours and could do it better than any soldiers on this earth. And when they delivered that volley fire, it shattered every enemy that they encountered.
But Montcalm is no novice. France's Indigenous allies honor a bond forged a century and a half earlier. Skilled snipers wreak havoc on the British lines. In a flurry of musket fire, a shot injures Wolfe. But it will be the next hit that proves fatal. Slowly dying, he learns that the French are in full retreat.
Now, God be praised. I will die in peace.
Montcalm too has been hit. The most iconic battle in Canadian history is over, all in less than 30 minutes.
Combien de temps me reste-t-il à vivre?
Quelques heures à peine.
Tant mieux. Je ne verrai pas les Anglais à Québec.
By the following morning, Montcalm is dead. And his defeated army surrenders the city. After a century and a half, it will be the end of New France. French culture survives. But Indigenous peoples will soon suffer a more devastating catastrophe.
Some estimates 90 to 99% of Indigenous peoples are wiped out by smallpox, bubonic plague, tuberculosis. I think that that's an important legacy of colonization to remember.
The British colonies will depend on the support of enduring Indigenous nations for their own survival. They must also win the cooperation of thousands of French Canadians.
There was no way not to have a Canada that was complicated by all of those relationships. It's just a question of how intelligently can we benefit from our mutual differences. And that is, of course, a challenge.
As Canada nears the turn of the 19th century, our future will be built on our natural resources, a bounty of riches that inspires partnerships, but also triggers our nation's greatest conflicts. By the mid-1700s, we surged toward our place as a nation. And while Americans are consumed by their war of independence, our latest generation of heroes, rebels, and entrepreneurs competes for the key to this land's prosperity. Our natural resources. It's an epic quest for treasure that paves the way for a new country. We are explorers, risk-takers, and dreamers, fighting the odds in a land of extremes. Across a vast continent, we build a nation. Truly strong and free. On the eastern edge of British North America, in what is now New Brunswick, 90% of this land is old-growth forest, some of the most valuable timber on Earth.
You have to see it, sir. We can't stop it.
June 1777.
It's getting worse.
Near the village of St. John, a band of timbermen race to head off disaster. They've spent months cutting down precious eastern white pine. Now, caught in a mammoth logjam, if these trees cannot make it to market, William Hazen will lose hundreds of thousands of today's dollars.
We always have to remember how bountiful this continent was when the early explorers arrived here. The richness of almost every single resource. Immigrants coming to Canada did not begin as a settler society. We began as a mercantile society.
William Hazen's investment is on the line. A fish and fur merchant from Massachusetts, Hazen has come north to seek his fortune and escape a bloody war. With the American War of Independence raging in the South, citizens are trapped between two worlds, the British Crown and a self-governing United States. Hazen bets his fortune and his future on the British.
Everybody came to Canada looking for something. people saw vast potential here in fur and natural resources. They had to dream as big as the country.
We are a country of incredible natural resource wealth. And the settlers who came here said the same thing. Their eyes went wide open and said, my gosh. And it has defined the way that we see ourselves.
Hazen's goal? To one day be the world's largest supplier of eastern white pine to the world's largest buyer, the British Navy.
The British Navy was the force that kept Britain strong, but it needed mass, it needed trees. These tremendously large trees.
Light, super flexible, and up to 50 meters tall, the eastern white pine is the perfect mast for the fastest warships on the planet. And the British will pay up to 25,000 of today's dollars for a single pine. These old-growth forests are a gold mine.
You can talk about spiritual wealth, you can talk about emotional riches, but there's just, cold, hard cash as well if you are able to do your job well. And a lot of those people were able to exploit that.
Hazen knows if he can't clear the logjam, he stands to lose a fortune. The solution comes from a highly volatile substance: black powder. The world's first chemical explosive. A mixture of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. It's the precursor to dynamite, but in its loose form, far more unstable.
None of these men set out to court danger. But these men had a level of kind of grit that's perhaps difficult for us to understand today.
The best thing about a great entrepreneur like William Hazen is they have this unshakable confidence that they can address the obstacles that life brings before them. They do not find life overwhelming. And there's always a way to solve a problem.
Hazen can now focus on growing his business and recruiting a workforce. He hires Mi'kmaq woodsmen, European immigrants, and a wave of Americans escaping the revolution, all in search of a better life.
Canada is a nation built on dreamers who dreamed of building a better future for themselves, for their family, and for what ultimately became our country.
But to the American Army, less than 100 kilometers away, Hazen's trade with their sworn British enemy is a threat. Colonel John Allen,
William Hazen!
one of George Washington's senior staff officers, is sent north to shut them down.
We believe you're putting your resources behind the wrong side.
Allen, he's the army, he's the Continental Army. He's come to invade this territory, to conquer this territory from its British territory. And he wants to take that from him. And I don't know about you, but I would have said, yes, take my land.
I don't care what you believe.
Colonel Allen wants Hazen out of his way. He imprisons him and instigates an aggressive takeover of his business.
The workers that would have been working for Hazen, they would have been absolutely dependent on him. He would have provided housing for these men. He would have fed their families. He would have known their families. He would know everything about these men. And they would have been loyal to him.
Hazen's men refuse to help. The American colonel has underestimated their allegiance to their employer.
Several weeks later, Hazen escapes. He gets back to Halifax. He tells what's happened, and Allen's invasion is effectively ended in that moment.
Determined to protect Hazen's assets, the British send 3 ships straight to St. John.
Let's go.
After weeks spent as a prisoner and days on the run, Hazen is free to return to his business. His loyalty to his new homeland secured.
It's the risk takers that tend to pop up a little taller than everybody else. You have to have a belief in yourself that you can do it in any walk of life. But you've got to have the stamina and the drive to do it and be able to get off the canvas once you hit the first failure and, and keep going.
If you don't have domestic Canadian businesses that create a thriving domestic economy, people wouldn't have seen a better life. If we didn't have entrepreneurs like William Hazen, I can't see how that colony would have been drawn into America. And Canada wouldn't be what it is today.
Within 50 years, British North America supplies over 80% of all British timber. Eastern Canada's economy becomes a powerhouse, transforming St. John from a wilderness settlement into the thriving commercial center of New Brunswick.
It's amazing when you look back that one person contributed to this collective identity. One person's story helped to shape our country.
From eastern Canada, European traders begin to head west in search of new riches, spreading out beyond the Great Lakes for the first time.
There was a sense that the West represented opportunity. There were merchants who saw the riches there as helping their pocketbooks. With the development of North America, there is always this push westward.
The charge is led by Canada's first trading empire, the Hudson's Bay Company. But a new rival company has set its sights on the West.
This new entity, the Northwest Company, it had one cardinal mission: to beat the bay to the source of the furs.
The European movement across North America was ultimately monetary. And it was very defining in terms of creating the country we now call Canada.
Both Hudson's Bay and Northwest companies move onto the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, Ojibwe, Cree, and Nakota. These company traders are the economic engine of a burgeoning nation, coming face to face with an ancient, formidable one, changing life on the prairies forever. 1802, on the western edge of the Great Plains, in what is now Alberta. The Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company arrived to establish trading posts at Rocky Mountain House. 3 company traders keep a close watch over their horses, their most valuable commodity. Nearby, a half-dozen young men of the Nakota Nation approach. Their traditions, nothing like those of the newcomers.
We don't come from a place of property that defines us. We have a connection to the earth. We have a connection to our land. That's our traditional way of being, is being with that land.
Chatka is their daring young leader. In broad daylight, he plans a horse raid, a competition for dominance against rival traders and nations.
It meant to protect your families, your community against this incursion of somebody totally different and very, very powerful, if I might add.
Chatka would have had a lot of prestige from having gone on raids. The more daring your raid, the more prestige you got.
For Chatka, this raid is also sport, meant to build his nation's reputation.
I don't think Europeans quite understood the war games. Often it's about bravery. It was sort of a way of life.
Chatka and his men go undercover.
When we think of these warriors of the plains, yes, it was exciting. But it was a dangerous thing, too. And the idea wasn't so much to kill your opponent, but rather to somehow get the best of your opponent without shedding any blood.
Chatka knows that the warrior with the most horses will become the master of the plains. After the last ice age, the horse disappears from North America. In the 16th century, it is reintroduced by the Spanish. Horses slowly migrate north, and by the dawn of the 1800s, there are millions on the plains.
The horse in plains culture was transformative. It also revolutionized the way that people hunted buffalo.
The North American bison, also known as buffalo, can run 65 kilometers an hour. A horse can hit 88.
Imagine the adrenaline rush of these warriors just chasing the stampeding buffalo. That's exciting, but very dangerous, I'm sure.
A mature male buffalo can weigh a ton. Before the horse, carrying its heavy carcass back to camp could take days. Now, with the horse, only hours. Nothing is wasted.
Everything you could imagine, you could make from a buffalo.
One buffalo yields more than 30 kilograms of the ultimate survival food, pemmican.
The pemmican really was the power bar of the 18th and 19th centuries.
A mixture of dried buffalo meat, fat, and berries that takes years to spoil. And it keeps the newcomers alive.
No fur traders on their long journeys would have been able to go a mile without a good supply of pemmican.
Chatka and the Nakota become some of the most prosperous traders on the plains and key leaders in the buffalo hunt. But for the buffalo, there's another change coming. More popular than the horse, but is far more destructive. The gun. It can take 15 arrows to kill one buffalo. With a rifle, just one bullet, aimed at the lungs. At the dawn of the 19th century, the buffalo number in the millions. By the end of that century, only hundreds will remain.
The eradication of the buffalo herds, it affected everyone, the Crees, the Métis. It changed the whole dynamic of the West.
It's been built into the way we've developed this country that too often we didn't think long term.
Throughout the 18th century, the pursuit of natural resources continues to define the growth of our nation. So far, the limitless wealth of the land has been exploited for European gain in the Old World. That is about to change. 24-year-old English immigrant Matthew Bell is determined to build an industrial empire right here. Born into great wealth in Britain, Bell has crossed the Atlantic to buy a labor-intensive, high-risk company in what is now the province of Quebec.
The people that came to Canada were visionaries. They left the known, they left their homes, they left their country. They wanted a better world.
Often the higher risk that you take, the bigger success you can have because of it. And that's exciting because, yeah, you could fail, but then you have a story to tell.
He's betting his family fortune that he can strike it rich and catapult Canada into the Industrial Revolution. (1793), just outside of Trois-Rivières, Quebec. Halfway between Montreal and Quebec City. British immigrant Matthew Bell makes the biggest decision of his life and purchases the lease to the Forge du Saint-Maurice. Bell is a visionary who sees Canada as fertile ground to create something new.
There are many stories of individuals who really felt that they could reinvent themselves. It's this idea of a future that they felt that they couldn't achieve or find in those places that they were coming from.
Bell doesn't know it, but he has just set the course for the industrialization of a nation. For 50 years, the forge has been supplied by a rich vein of iron ore that lies just below ground outside of Trois-Rivières. It provides Lower Canada's 200,000 residents with iron goods. From axes to horseshoes, all basic staples for 18th century life.
Items were produced by craftsmen in different forms, different ways, but mainly for local consumption.
But Bell has a much bolder idea for the Forge Saint-Maurice. He's ready to modernize his inventory and expand distribution.
What differentiates entrepreneurs from everyone else is that they're seeing a future that other people can't. They're seeing and they're believing, and then they're actually building everything they want the future to look like.
Bell has seen the Industrial Revolution transform millions of lives in England through the introduction of modern factories and mass production. He wants to bring this revolution to Lower Canada. So he puts his mind to solving our greatest challenge: surviving the winter.
Winter shapes us more than anything else. Winter's one season out of 4, and yet it defines us more than the other 3 seasons combined.
Our ancestor had to be very, very creative and very innovative in order to find some ways to survive in these extreme conditions.
In the 1780s, people in Canada depend upon open-air fires to heat their homes during winter. But 80% of that heat escapes, and old stone homes remain below freezing.
Stone is essentially a sponge. If you blow up stone under a microscope, you'll see a lot of holes. And they suffered the variations in temperature because of that. So what we think are the good old days when they were built like buildings should be built, the reality is what you'd find is they weren't great buildings. They just weren't.
Bell sees an opportunity to create a more efficient heat source. An airtight stove that radiates more heat than a fireplace and will save Canadians from suffering through brutal winters.
Innovation is being unsatisfied with the status quo and being crazy enough to believe that you can change that.
Bell takes a calculated risk to reinvent the Forge Saint-Maurice from a toolmaker into a high-efficiency appliance manufacturer.
You almost have to get comfortable with constantly being in this state of like, I might go bankrupt, this might not work, the market might not like it.
He hires forgers to experiment with a revolutionary concept. the wood box mold. The mold forces liquid iron to harden in the precise shape necessary for an airtight seal. The first of its kind to be designed and manufactured in Canada. It's dangerous and delicate work.
Sir, we will have to wait overnight for it to set.
Success. A stove that can now burn wood reaching 600 degrees Celsius, twice as hot as an open fire. A game changer for people living in a frozen continent. Sales take off. 100 orders in the first months.
There's nothing quite like this growth stage of a company, right? There's this first stage, which I would describe as the fear of not knowing if this is going to work.
The work is intricate and time-consuming. Bell can't keep up with the demand.
The second stage is you have something that's working and you just can't grow fast enough. And that's what was happening here is everyone now wanted one of these stoves.
To deliver his stoves to hundreds of new customers, Bell must also recast the workday. He employs over 400 people to build his stoves and guarantees his workers year-round employment. Matthew Bell becomes the first company owner in Lower Canada to pay his workers a guaranteed annual salary.
It was the opportunity for those Canadians and Quebecois to settle down, to have some kind of security.
Production soars, and by 1800, the St. Maurice Forge manufactures over 1,000 stoves a year, 10 times their original output.
This was one of those innovations that allowed us to produce at a rate that we had never imagined.
It's a commercial triumph. Bell's invention becomes affectionately known as the Canada Stove.
The stove was important because it's a symbol of the Industrial Revolution, a symbol of what Canada would become, a manufacturing country, a modern country, an industrial country. And that was the key to prosperity.
The forge grows not just an industry, but the community around it. The population of St. Maurice doubles, making it Canada's first company town.
It changed the world that we knew, and it transformed what we were.
Over the next 200 years, company towns become an emblem of our growing nation, coast to coast. From the steel town of Hamilton to the oil patch mecca of Fort McMurray.
Whether or not that's been to our detriment in terms of the exploitation of natural resources, it's always something that has been, deeply woven into our economy and our identity as a country.
As European industry is born in the east, thousands of kilometers away to the west, an indigenous industry thrives. No European has laid eyes on it until now. On April 1st, 1778, a British Navy expedition seeks a shortcut between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It's an epic quest to hunt down the fabled Northwest Passage.
They want to find their way around North America. It's all about trying to find your way around North America to get to Asia. It's all about trade. It's all about the commerce of empire.
But before they find a passage, the British ships take shelter in Nootka Sound, off today's Vancouver Island, and discover a rich indigenous nation that will dominate the global fur trade.
First Peoples, particularly in British Columbia, but right across this country, had rich, vibrant societies that were complex.
They were already well established as business people. They knew how to drive a bargain, and they knew the value of what they were trading.
And on this coast, all trade runs through a powerful 22-year-old leader, Chief McQuina of the Mowachat Nation.
course, McKenna was impressed by the scale of the ships, but they weren't intimidated by the people on those ships. I mean, after all, McKenna was a chief. He controlled huge territories, in some sense, his known world.
McKenna was one of the biggest chiefs amongst many, many big chiefs. He was a king of kings, if you will. And that was recognized widely on the West Coast.
The young Chief McKenzie is an experienced trader and is undaunted by Britain's greatest explorer. A man who has twice circled the globe, Captain James Cook. The impact of their meeting will be felt around the world. On the western edge of North America, two great powers are introduced. Chief McKenzie of the Mowachat Nation has just invited Captain James Cook of the British Empire to a meeting.
There were extensive trading networks of the First Nations in this country, and they were very entrepreneurial. Much of Canada was built on industrious entrepreneurs who found ways to create businesses that harvested the resources we have in this country.
McKenzie presents a pelt native to the North Pacific, the sea otter. Cook has never seen anything like it.
I can only imagine what he must have felt when he held the first sea otter pelt in his hand. The sea otter never feels a drop of water on its flesh because of that insulation, and that's what made them so valuable. This wasn't another beaver. This is the animal that has the richest fur in the world.
McKenzie trades his pelts for precious metals and tools, and sends Cook to introduce his extraordinary furs to the world.
This desire for trade in the sea pelt, that was their introduction to the global economy.
Crossing the Pacific with McKenzie's furs, Cook is ambushed and killed in a skirmish with Indigenous Hawaiians. But his crews reach China, and the lustrous sea otter pelts become a worldwide sensation. Europeans flock to Nootka Sound, creating fierce competition amongst rival trappers.
Suddenly, there was this frenzied, feverish demand for that product, and they weren't about to let that trade out of their hands. And they played Spaniard off against Englishmen, off against Russian, and did whatever they could to control the trade and to maximize their profit from that trade.
1789, Spain unilaterally declares itself McKenzie's sole trading partner, prompting Britain to threaten war. McKenzie knows this explosive feud threatens the Mowachat Nation's business. He summons the Europeans. Spain's Captain Juan Francisco de la Bodega and Britain's Captain George Vancouver. McKenzie introduces them to what will become Canadian diplomacy.
That process of seeking consensus was something that was at the core of an Indigenous understanding of the world.
Welcome.
To strengthen his position, he has taught himself English and Spanish.
Bienvenidos.
The fur trade was built on Indigenous principles of trust and discussion and meetings and relationships, which was a totally non-European way of doing it. And it was the Indigenous rules which dominated all of that.
McKenzie's negotiations lead to an international agreement. Britain and Spain will now share the sea otter trade with the Mowachat. With his territory protected under trade law and a global market for his furs, McKenna's wealth multiplies.
And he shared that wealth, which is an important part of what makes a man powerful.
The Pacific fur trade is now one of the most lucrative in the world. The Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company are desperate to get in. But they need an overland route to the West Coast. And no one, neither Indigenous nor European, is known to have done this before.
Imagine no roads, no little paths carved into the hills where the nice guide from Banff shows you how it was. Nothing. A compass, and an axe, and a dream.
May 9th, 1793, Fort Fork, southwest of today's Peace River, Alberta. The Northwest Company has commissioned a band of explorers led by 29-year-old Alexander McKenzie. They embark on the most epic adventure in Canadian history, finding a route that links the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans.
People didn't paddle a canoe across the continent in order to get a little bit of light exercise. They were in quest of wealth, and the wealth in Canada was based on the fur trade.
Standing in Mackenzie's way, an uncharted stretch of 100 separate mountain ranges, 4,800 kilometers long.
You look at the Rockies, and you're filled with awe. They're huge, absolutely astounding. But because we're humans, we want to see what's beyond.
If he succeeds, Mackenzie will reshape British North America.
What made Mackenzie tick? There's something within him that wants to move west. It's a challenge, it's an opportunity, it's like climbing the Everest.
But first, he must survive the deadly journey ahead. Alexander McKenzie has been a fur trader since the age of 15. He's joined the Northwest Company, which is desperate to enter the sea otter trade. Mackenzie now has the impossible task of crossing the Rockies.
I mean, we're very lucky. We can travel across this big, huge land that's far too big because we can get on a plane, but it wasn't that long ago, none of those things existed.
It's a 2,000-kilometer trek through the punishing wilderness.
I, can't leave the house without my phone, let alone, tackling a mountain with no sense of what's on the other side of it. It's incredible, the amount of faith in the adventure and bravery.
4 years earlier, Mackenzie attempted the same trip but got lost, following a river that left him in the Arctic Ocean.
They did that journey to the Arctic. Then he went back to England to study new ideas of navigation that had come about with the development of an understanding of longitude.
Mackenzie can now calculate his precise position and hopes to avoid another costly mistake. Mackenzie's team of French-Canadian voyageurs and guides from the Dene Nation paddle for weeks against the current. Up the Peace, Finley, and Parsnip rivers, until violent rapids make paddling impossible. The only way out is up. 1,400 kilograms of supplies and one unwieldy canoe must be hauled up a mountain. It's what the French Canadians call a portage.
May 22nd. At break of day, the men began, without delay, to cut a road up the mountain.
They use the terrain to their advantage, rigging an ingenious system of ropes and pulleys. Hiking more than 390 meters above the rocky river below. At the top, they meet a local elder who tells McKenzie of a foot trail to the river's next navigable section.
They were constantly encountering and using the help of local people. I mean, that's what an explorer does.
With the grueling 3-day portage complete, they return to the water. June 12th, McKenzie finally reaches the Continental Divide. On either side of this height, the water flows east or west. The men will now paddle down the river towards the Pacific.
At last, we enjoyed, after all our toil and anxiety, finding ourselves on the bank of a navigable river.
But here too, they will face disaster.
The violence of the current was so great as to drive the canoe sideways down the river. We drove against the rock, which shattered the stern.
Morale hits rock bottom. McKenzie has a new goal: to survive.
The moment when you're pushed to your limits is when the battle begins. When you are exhausted, when you have nothing else to give, that is when you start fighting.
But the Fraser River has its own deadly hazards, including a sheer drop. Their precious route to the sea blocked. McKenzie must convince his men that their best chance is to backtrack 12 days and 285 kilometers to the Horsefly River. They push west over some of the world's most rugged terrain. The men are depleted, on the verge of abandoning the expedition.
The discouragements, difficulties, and dangers have excited the wish to discontinue this pursuit, and it began to be muttered on all sides that there was no alternative but to return.
Finally, a lucky break, courtesy of the New Hulk Nation.
Our traditional greetings have always been openness. That's what we offered. We'll help you survive. You are strangers to this land. You need some help here, because this is what we've been taught to share.
July 22nd, 1793. After 3 months and nearly 2,000 kilometers, McKenzie follows what is now Bella Coola River in British Columbia and reaches the Pacific Ocean. He famously leaves his mark using berries and grease, later permanently inscribed by local surveyors.
And McKenzie imagined more and determined his need to see more. And why? Because I'm sure he wished to be more.
Alexander McKenzie breaks more than a geographic barrier. He connects a continent, blazing a trail that will eventually lead to the wealth of the open Pacific. Canada's new foundational industry, the fur trade, now stretches from east to west.
Our natural resources will always be incredibly important to us, but don't kid yourself. Our greatest natural resource is not what's in the ground or above the ground or in the water. It's the people. It's Canadians. It's our people who are our greatest resource.
Through courage, ingenuity, and collaboration, diverse peoples have forged new links across this vast land, reaching 3 oceans. But this new union of the North is about to be tested by war and a massive invasion from the South. (1812). The United States of America, a fast rising power of 8 million, declares war on Britain and prepares to invade our colony. With the British Empire entrenched in a European war, we must fight for our homeland on our own. Fearless, ingenious, and for the first time, united. The War of 1812 is Canada's war of independence. We are explorers, risk-takers, and dreamers, fighting the odds in a land of extremes. Across a vast continent, we build a nation. Truly strong and free. August 5th, 1812. While thousands of American troops amass near the border of Upper Canada, 25 kilometers south of what is now Windsor, Ontario, a warrior plans an ambush. Chief Tecumseh of the Shawnee Nation. Tecumseh has been fighting the Americans for 20 years as they tear through his ancestral homelands.
American settlement was insatiable. It was not going to stop. And so Tecumseh understood that there was no compromise with the Americans on these things.
Tecumseh has marshaled 13 diverse Indigenous nations to confront the American onslaught.
Our lives are in the hands of the Great Spirit. We are determined to defend our lands. And if it's His will, we wish to leave our bones upon them.
Tecumseh was forward-looking. He could lead people because they believed in the vision.
He was brilliant in bringing the people together. Today, I think they would be called freedom fighters. They would be the ones defending their homelands.
As the American troops flee, they leave behind critical intelligence, direct from their most important stronghold. Fort Detroit, on the American side of the Detroit River, protected by 7-meter walls, 39 heavy cannons, and a garrison for 2,500 American troops, now preparing to invade Upper Canada. Their commander, General William Hull, a 59-year-old veteran of the American Revolution.
Enter. Did the dispatchers get through?
They have been intercepted, sir.
The documents recovered from American troops are a strategic coup, and Tecumseh knows exactly how to use them. The British have been wavering on informal pledges to protect Indigenous lands. Tecumseh wants to make a deal. Military intelligence in exchange for Britain's firm support.
Everything that he counted on prior to 1811 is gone. What he's doing is trying to maneuver with what's left. The only way he can do this is with British supplies. He had no choice but to go to the British in order to defeat the Americans.
Tecumseh embarks on an historic meeting with Upper Canada's Major General, Isaac Brock.
Obviously, Brock sized up Tecumseh, and Tecumseh sized up Brock. And they were impressed with each other, and therefore they had trust and confidence in each other, which is really, really important.
They dissect the letter from General Hull.
I have every reason to expect, in a very short time, a large body of savages will be directed against this army. You must be sensible of the difficulties which will attend my situation.
Hull's extraordinary letter betrays a key weakness: his neurotic fear of Indigenous people.
It was perfect. I mean, you know, if it had been designed by Sigmund Freud, it couldn't have been any better. It laid out his midnight terrors. It laid out his fears. And you know, all you had to do was devise something that would answer that.
Tecumseh offers the help of hundreds of his warriors in exchange for Britain's support for a sovereign Indigenous homeland west of the Appalachian Mountains.
What was at stake for Tecumseh? Huge territory, the well-being of his people and many nations that had joined together. He thought it was a smart alliance to make.
Brock and Tecumseh agree on an audacious plan. First, Brock writes a letter to General Hull.
You must be aware that the numerous body of Indians which have attached themselves to my troops will be beyond my control the moment the contest commences.
Brock's threat plays straight into Hull's greatest fears.
Brock was a brilliant leader, and he had imagination. Being a good soldier is often very unimaginative. Brock was imaginative.
Now, it's Tecumseh's time to strike. August 15th, 1812. Bolstered by warriors from the Delaware, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi nations, Tecumseh leads 600 men across the Detroit River towards the American fort, where Brock and his 800 troops will join them. Tecumseh lands on the shores south of Fort Detroit and sizes up the battlefield. Outnumbered 2-1, Tecumseh's plan depends on a clever ruse.
To the west.
Like a magician staging an illusion, Tecumseh orders his men to sweep through the woods in one direction and then back, again and again, choreographing a formation that makes the hundreds at his command look like a cast of thousands. Hull sees a massive fighting force of fierce warriors. His worst nightmare, right before his eyes.
That is a genius move. Knowing your enemy, using fear as a tactic.
Fear is a tool for a commander. It's a tactic. It's part of psychological warfare. You want the enemy to look at you and think, oh my God, they're unpredictable. I don't know what they're going to do. They could be over here one moment, behind me another.
Sir, your orders? General, sir.
Brock joins Tecumseh to await the American general's response. Hull's next move is an act that will lead to his court-martial. He surrenders. Brock and Tecumseh have secured Canada's first major victory against the United States.
It's widely thought that the defense policy of Canada up until about 1820 was that it couldn't be defended without the Indigenous people. It's a very imperfect history, but it's filled with these surprising relationships.
Tecumseh's role in the victory strengthens his alliance with the British.
Without him, and without his men, and without his incredible sense of military reasoning, the British would have been done for. If there's a country called Canada, it's because of Tecumseh and what he did.
But 14 months later, the proud Shawnee leader dies in battle. Brock, too, is killed defending Upper Canada. His promise to support a sovereign Indigenous homeland never fulfilled.
The British forgot about the deal with Tecumseh and everybody else, and really gave away control of the lands.
The humiliating defeat at Fort Detroit enrages the U.S. military. Over the next 8 months, the U.S. lashes out in a series of fierce attacks along the Canadian border. But the real prize sits on the north shore of Lake Ontario. After a long winter, the ice finally clears on the Great Lake. On April 27, 1813, the Americans launch 14 warships in a major naval offensive. Their target is one of Canada's most important military bases, the garrison of Fort York. Fort York defends Upper Canada's capital, what is now Toronto. Inside the fort's armory, a massive stockpile of deadly munitions.
So ammunitions, black powder at the time, anything that they would be able to get their hands on would be the lifeline of the fight. It's a war-winning asset.
If the Americans take the armory, they'll own the explosive equivalent of 14 Tomahawk cruise missiles. And by noon, they've already reached the gates. April 27, 1813. 2,000 American soldiers assault the western wall of Fort York. One of its defenders, 58-year-old Captain Tito Lev, a veteran of the French Navy, now fighting for the British.
Prenez vos positions. Allons-y.
Lev has seen enough war to know that his men, outnumbered 3-1, don't stand a chance.
When you're outnumbered in the battle, I mean, suddenly you're going to feel very, very alone. The feeling would be an ominous dread of what's about to transpire. If it's an equal fight, you've got a chance. But if you look at that hill and there's a lot more of them than there is of you, they see what's coming. Because soldiers can count.
The Americans breach the fort's defenses at the west wall. Lev and his men retreat.
A retreat is one of the most difficult operations of war to execute. And if you get it wrong, the enemy is going to take you.
Losses are mounting. Surrender seems inevitable. The Americans close in on their target. Fort York's huge stockpile of cannons, mortars, and explosive black powder. Then, Lev receives an order. He must stop the American forces at any cost. With time running out, Lev knows there's only one thing he can do.
He knew that probably he would never come back. It's an empowering moment where you realize that, okay, I'm gonna be the one doing it. I'm gonna do it right, and I won't fail you.
The fort is lost, but the battle isn't over.
He's given a chance to his fellow soldiers. He's given a chance to his leaders. He's given a chance to the nation to survive.
A lifelong soldier, a loving husband and father. This is Leliev's defining moment.
What's interesting about courage is that it is the most important of all virtues because it's the one that underpins all others. You don't have anything else unless you have courage.
Tito Lev sets a fuse and ignites a blast, felt almost 50 kilometers away on the Niagara Peninsula.
People are watching this and thinking, what difference can I make? I'm one person. What difference can I make in this country? Tito was one dude. He made an incredible difference.
The explosion instantly kills 38 American troops, including their high-ranking general. 40 of Leliev's fellow soldiers are caught in the blast.
Yes, people died in that explosion. But then you wonder how many more people would have died had the American troops gotten their hands on those munitions. Well, that's leadership. You gotta live with that.
Leliev survives. The American casualties are 5 times greater than the British. The Americans retaliate, unleashing their revenge on the people of York. For 6 days, the Americans loot homes and York's library. They destroy the sole printing press and burn the Parliament buildings. Ground Zero, what is now downtown Toronto.
People live in Toronto and they have no idea that it was a battleground. There are people buried there. There are bullets and bones under our feet every day.
The American tactics in Canada were bloody, brutal, and stupid, and they alienated the local population.
The citizens of York fight back. They are now ready to lay down their lives to preserve their independence.
Those people would have felt exactly like we would feel today. That kind of fight brings people together, and a kind of an identity is forged out of that.
What will make a country, it's not just geography, it's not lines on a map, it's a sense of shared identity, it's an imagined community. I think the War of 1812 helped to do that.
June 1813. Queenston, Ontario, 10 kilometers north of Niagara Falls. It's a thriving, densely populated trading hub on the Canadian side of the Niagara River. Home to Laura Secord. With a husband wounded in battle, Laura Secord is left to run their farm, rear their children, and care for him on her own.
Children, into the room. I think each and every woman of that generation had tremendous courage.
James.
What we forget is that women were the glue of the family and the hope for the future.
Everything Secord has worked for, everything she loves, is directly in the path of a hostile, invading army that is low on food, shelter, and supplies. They take what they want when they want it. And Laura Secord's home is next.
James.
June 21st, 1813. The home of Laura Secord and her family has been seized by American soldiers, including Captain Cyrenius Chapin. Chapin is the leader of a clandestine American operation.
Just a minute. If we raise our swords against the British, Upper Canada will break. I tell you, they will not expect our attack.
Chapin wants to cut off and occupy the Niagara Peninsula, a key supply line for British troops. In the next 2 days, he plans to attack the British camp protecting the peninsula. Laura Secord has a decision to make. Stay by her family's side or risk her life to warn the British at their camp. The camp is 30 kilometers away through American-held territory. Secord knows if she is caught as a spy, she could be shot on sight.
I can't imagine what it was like at that time to take that action as a female. The strength, the tenacity, the audacity that she had to do what she did, the confidence. And here we are so many decades later, looking back at a woman who shows that women can do anything.
Hour by grueling hour, she avoids American patrols and presses onward. With nightfall coming, Secord is lost. Then, a fateful encounter. A 16-year-old warrior on the lookout for Americans. John Tutela of the Cayuga Nation.
Some may think that Laura Secord ran into these guys by chance. I don't think for 1 minute that they found themselves there by chance. I think those two people were meant to find one another in the woods and to change the course of history.
I need to get to the British.
Secord entrusts Tutela with her secret.
We need to go to them quick.
He and his warriors agree to escort her to the British detachment the Americans will soon attack. After an 18-hour trek, they arrive at the British camp.
Would she have known that it really was one of the turning points of our independence? No, maybe not, but she knew she had to do it.
I need to speak to your master in command.
Secord reveals the Americans' plan to British Lieutenant James Fitzgibbon.
In Beaver Dams. Within hours. Maybe 12, 13, I'm not sure.
Laura Secord is a hero. And like a lot of heroes who are ordinary people, they say, well, I just did the thing that had to be done. It's what people do every day in small ways. And sometimes those small things have historic implications and historic reverberations.
You must act fast.
Fitzgibbon plans a counterattack, but he'll need help. With his fellow warriors, Tutela ambushes the Americans 5 kilometers from the British detachment. Chapin and his men surrender. Through their alliance, John Tutela and Laura Secord helped to save the Niagara Peninsula, stopping the American advance into Upper Canada.
We were a group of disparate communities and cultures and individuals trying to work together on a massive land, and we didn't know what we were. We didn't have a national identity. We didn't have a nation. But we knew that with the Americans encroaching, we weren't that.
The U.S. military is counting on the British Navy's preoccupation with its war with Napoleon overseas. The Americans believe that Canada will be easily conquered.
I think they had the sense they could carry out this war, get Canada fairly easily. All of North America was going to be part of the United States.
The British Empire cannot send reinforcements, but they can rely on a new kind of warrior. He's not a naval officer, but a seafaring mercenary, a privateer.
Privateers would be anybody that wanted to be part of the fight, make a living, and happen to have some resources that they could use for the fight.
Keep a sharp eye! These should be rich waters!
Captain Joseph Barse from Nova Scotia, known to Americans as the terror of the New England seaboard. His mission, to kidnap American merchant ships and seize their cargo.
What the privateers did was cut off American trade. By doing that, you've undermined the American economy. Privateers cut off the money.
Captain Barse's skill at privateering just might save his country from being conquered by the Americans.
On to the next prize!
A dangerous new rebel is prowling the eastern seaboard, seizing American cargo and threatening its economy. Captain Joseph Barse of Liverpool, Nova Scotia, a veteran privateer. Barse and his crew are on a mission to hunt down American ships, sailing through the waters off Cape Cod.
This group of people would not have been embraced by society, would not have been invited in for supper. I'm guessing they were only popular when they were useful. They weren't people that people wanted to marry their daughters, but they changed the course of history.
Barsa's schooner is a former high-speed mail ship called the Liverpool Packet. It's light, nimble, and gives him the advantage of surprise. He's soon within a nautical mile of a rich target. An American brig called the Swift. Captained by Benoni Cook, the Swift is heavy with a small fortune in cotton and leather from Savannah, Georgia.
The United States had become a very wealthy country, and their ships bore the riches of the age, and for privateers, the gains could be very great.
Barse flies the stars and stripes to fool his prey. An illegal maneuver for military ships. But privateers aren't bound by the laws of the Navy.
Put one across our bow!
He fires a 12-pounder. A warning to stop or perish.
Privateering's a dodgy business, and if you run across the wrong ship, of course, it's a fatal business.
The Swift is outgunned. Its crew in no mood to fight for their cargo.
Mr. Starling, Mr. Thomas, hold these men in the bow. Mr. Fraser, hoist the colors. Move along.
It's important to make the Americans feel that if they go a mile or 2 miles out of the safety of their ports, everything is left up to chance.
It's tradition to place the captured ashore close to their home. Barse grants Benoni and his crew this small mercy.
It made the Americans feel vulnerable. It made them feel exposed, and it made them feel insecure. And, you know, that's really important in war.
Barse and his men sail both ships back to Canadian waters. The Swift, along with the rest of the prizes captured by Barse, are worth up to $4 million of today's dollars. In 10 months, Barse captures 50 vessels, 9 schooners in a single day. Canada's most successful privateer.
We don't have a kind of an archetypal glowing good Canadian against an evil American there. It's all much muddier, and there's a long, long tradition of pirates being legitimated by governments going back to the time of Queen Elizabeth I.
Over 3 years, Canadian privateers capture more than 200 American ships, disrupting American trade routes to Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean, helping to expand a shipping industry in Nova Scotia, contributing to the growth of Halifax from a colonial harbor town to one of Canada's busiest port cities. The United States now realizes that Canada will not fall easily.
Thomas Jefferson said the acquisition of Canada would be a mere matter of marching, which is exactly what Canadians hate about Americans.
Outnumbered 27-1, the people of Canada will not surrender. Our forces hold in Windsor, Toronto, Niagara, and all along our Atlantic coast. Frustrated, the U.S. military plans to land the knockout blow. 10,000 troops march on the heart of Lower Canada, Montreal.
If the Americans get to Montreal, they cut the St. Lawrence. It isolates the British and the Canadians in Upper Canada. If they take Montreal, they win the war.
October 25th, 1813. Captain Joseph Maurice Lamotte of Montreal's 3rd Battalion. A skilled fur trader from the Northwest Company, fluent in several Indigenous languages. Lamotte leads a multinational force of Abenaki, Algonquin, and Haudenosaunee warriors. Under the cover of night, they use their woodsman skills to scout the American advance.
Guerrilla fighters are both psychological, but they're also important militarily because what they do is they hit the enemy where he's most vulnerable. They are the IEDs of the War of 1812.
Commanding 1,000 men in the lead U.S. Brigade, Brigadier General George Izard, a career soldier and son of a U.S. Senator. With the eyes of his nation upon him, Izard's mission is to seize Montreal and bring this unpopular war to a close. And now, his forces are closing in. October 25th, 1813, near what is now Chateauguay, Quebec. In a final push to win the war, 4,000 American troops march north to Montreal. Captain Joseph Maurice Lamotte returns to base camp to report the Americans' position to his commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles de Salaberry, a French-Canadian and soldier since the age of 14. De Salaberry knows, with only 1,500 troops at his command, this battle will not be won with firepower.
They were clearly outnumbered, so that's terrifying to even walk into something like that, knowing that you're the underdog. And that actually really creates such a unified team.
Vous et vos hommes allez prendre la crête. Nous serons ici. Ouais.
Aujourd'hui, on verra de quel bois on se chauffe.
De Salaberry assembles a team of Indigenous warriors, French-Canadian militia, and escaped slaves from the U.S. A diverse fraternity with a common cause.
The idea of African Canadians, Scots, you know, all these Aboriginals, all these people that are now identifying themselves as Canadian, and they are fighting the Americans was crucial. Must have been a very, very powerful experience indeed.
I really think the Canadian identity is multiple identities. We were founded literally on so many different people coming together, and I don't think that's changed. I think we are still cultivating that.
To defend themselves, this diverse force makes a weapon of the very thing which unites them: intimate knowledge of their homeland.
Even with all the technology that we have, to use the landscape in your advantage is a military tactics that will win the war.
Izard and his American force follow the Chateauguay River north. But now, the river narrows into a ravine, flanked on both sides by steep slopes and dense Canadian forest. It's the perfect stage for an ambush. De Salaberry's men construct a massive abattis, the early ancestor of barbed wire.
The one that's going to be able to use the ground best will be the one that will win.
By early afternoon, 300 French-Canadian sharpshooters are positioned at the crest of the ravine. Izard and his 1,000 troops march into view. The battle is on.
Forward! March! March!
Under fire from two sides, Izard orders his troops to keep advancing. Their numbers and their resolve overwhelmed de Salaberry's men. For every soldier shot, a dozen move forward. Feeling the tide turn against him, de Salaberry improvises with a daring move.
Bugler!
He calls in his bugler, a black soldier from America, now fighting for Canada.
In their minds, this is my country, and you're trying to invade my country. I'm going to do everything I can to help repel the oppressors.
They had a real stake in this fight. You know, they knew that if they lost this war, the only option for them was to go back to slavery. In Canada, they found a country that hadn't quite formed yet, but that was willing to accept them, where they could have a life.
Buglers sound their battle calls, signaling the arrival of oncoming Canadian troops. Troops that do not exist. Now Izard is the one who feels outnumbered.
Unity of effort will bring people together. And I think this is what forged Canada since our genesis.
Pull back! Pull back!
And I think this is what we are as Canadians, to be able to use the strength of our differences and to be able to make them come together for one purpose.
Izard's men retreat south of the border and never return. Although it is known today as the War of 1812, the U.S. war against Britain in Canada lasts nearly 3 years, until February 18th, 1815. By war's end, 48,000 people have gone to battle for Canada, 10,000 of them Indigenous. Over 2,000 people die in action, thousands more from disease. All of these men and women fight for a common cause: the identity of an emerging nation.
There were so many different people who came here at different times, but when a threat comes in to take the very thing that you've built, and you all band together to fight for the same thing, essentially, I mean, that's where you've created the country.
War of 1812 was very much Canada's War of Independence because it defined Canada, it defined Canadians, it made it very clear that we were not Americans and we were never going to be.
For nearly 3 years, the outnumbered Canadians beat back wave after wave of American invasions, denying their neighbors' dream of controlling the continent. Within a single generation, Canada will no longer be a colony, but a sovereign nation. But together, we'll need to connect over 5,000 kilometers of landmass from coast to coast.